Friends, this is the story of two young women who are repeatedly assaulted by a group of men. But instead of giving up, they decide to fight back and take revenge on each one of them. Let's find out how it all unfolds. The story begins with two agriculture students, Katie and Nancy, who are about to leave for a farm in New York as part of their studies. They're both incredibly excited. They talk about how this trip will also give them the chance to explore New York and do plenty of shopping before heading back home. Neither of them realizes this exciting trip will soon become a nightmare. The next morning, their uncle Jason arrives to pick them up. Jason is an FBI agent. When they get to his house, they meet his girlfriend, who's genuinely happy to see them. Since they're starting fresh in a new city, Katie and Nancy even decide to go by new names. Katie chooses Heather, while Nancy decides to call herself Ripley. A fresh start feels exciting, but danger is already much closer than they think. The following day, Jason takes them to the bus station because they're heading to the agricultural farm for their study program. He waits with them for the New York-bound bus, but Katie tells Jason he can go ahead because they'll be just fine from there. Jason walks away, unaware of the terrifying events waiting just ahead. After they arrive at the farm, Jason tells them to use code words whenever they send him a message, so he'll know it's really them. Katie says, "I'll use the word apple," but Jason tells her they need to use a different word, starting with a different letter every time, so no one can figure out their code. Just then, two guys driving by notice Katie and Nancy. After Jason leaves, Katie and Nancy stop at a restaurant for coffee. A few minutes later, the same two guys who had seen them earlier walk in. Their names are Jed and Lucas. They strike up a conversation, and Katie and Nancy introduce themselves as Heather and Ripley. They tell them they're heading to an agricultural farm outside New York for their study program. What starts as a casual conversation quickly begins feeling strangely personal. Jed tells them they're actually heading the same way and offers to give them a ride to the farm. Katie immediately turns down the offer, but as Jed and Lucas are about to leave, Nancy convinces Katie to go with them instead. The two girls finally agree and get into their vehicle. Instead of taking them to the farm, Jed and Lucas drive them to their house, which sits right next to a wooded area. The moment Katie and Nancy realize they're not at the farm, they become uneasy and immediately ask to be taken there instead. The quiet house beside the woods suddenly feels anything but welcoming. Just then, Jed and Lucas's mum comes outside and warmly invites them in for some tea. She assures them that after they finish, Jed and Lucas will take them to the farm. Feeling a little more at ease, the two girls sit down and begin drinking their tea. Neither of them realizes they're already walking straight into a deadly trap. While they're drinking their tea, Katie gets a text from her uncle Jason. She replies with the code word apple, making Jason believe the two of them have safely arrived at the farm. A little later, Lucas's mum brings them something to eat. The moment they finish eating, Katie and Nancy begin feeling dizzy. The food has been laced with drugs, and they immediately realize something is terribly wrong. They try to run, but after making it only a short distance, they collapse unconscious. Jed and Lucas carry them back to the house. The one message meant to protect them now hides the terrifying truth. The next morning, they wake up in the middle of the woods. Their hands are locked in heavy iron chains. The sight leaves both of them terrified, and they begin screaming for help. A few moments later, Jed walks over and tells them they're deep in a part of the forest where there isn't another person for miles, so screaming is completely useless. Every desperate scream disappears into the silent forest without a single answer. A short time later, a man named Boris arrives, holding one of their phones. He tells them that someone named Jason has been texting the phone and asks about the message that simply said apple. He wants to know what it means. Katie finally explains that apple is a code word, one that tells Jason they're safe. Without realizing it, Katie has already given their captors exactly what they needed.
Boris replies to Jason's text, telling him everything is fine and that they're all having fun. He even includes the code word apple, convincing Jason that nothing is wrong. After that, the group forces Katie and Nancy to bathe in front of them. Just then, a police officer named Sharif arrives. The moment Katie and Nancy see him, they desperately beg for help, but they soon realize he's working with Jed and Lucas. Terrified, they plead with everyone to let them go, promising they won't tell anyone. No one listens. Their last hope disappears the moment the officer reveals his true side. The corrupt officer takes a Viagra pill and chooses Katie for himself. A short time later, he comes back out of Katie's shipping container, making it clear that he has sexually assaulted her. Meanwhile, Jason becomes increasingly worried because Katie used the code word apple for a second time, something she was never supposed to do. Jason senses something is terribly wrong, even without knowing the full truth. Not long afterward, the group sends an unstable drug addict into Katie's container. He burns her stomach with a lit cigarette, causing her to scream in agony before he sexually assaults her as well. The nightmare grows even darker as every passing hour steals more hope. Katie screams in unbearable pain. By this point, the group has crossed every possible line of cruelty. They force both Katie and Nancy into sexual exploitation. At the same time, Jason calls the agricultural farm in New York to ask about the two girls. That's when he learns they never arrived there at all. He immediately realizes they're in serious danger and sets out to find them. The truth finally reaches Jason, and every second suddenly becomes critical. Meanwhile, things only get worse for Katie and Nancy. Before the next customer arrives, Jed and Lucas force masks onto both of them. The customer is also wearing a pig mask. Then, Jed and Lucas remove the girls' masks so the customer can see their faces. The moment Nancy sees the man in the pig mask, she's even more terrified. Fear replaces every remaining trace of hope inside the isolated containers. The man chooses Nancy and takes her into one of the containers where he sexually assaults her. After he leaves, Katie goes to check on Nancy and finds her in devastating condition. Katie realizes the nightmare is far from over for either of them. Meanwhile, Jason arrives at the local police station where he runs into the same officer who assaulted Katie. Jason explains that Katie and Nancy have been kidnapped and tells him that he's an FBI agent. The officer asks how he's so certain they've been abducted. Jason explains that he instructed Katie to use a specific code word only once, but she repeated the exact same code word in another message. One repeated word is all Jason needs to uncover the hidden truth. Back in the woods, the corrupt officer passes this information on to Boris. He tells him that Katie's uncle is an FBI agent and that Katie deliberately gave them false information about the code word. Boris pulls Jed away from Katie's container and tells him they need to get rid of both girls as soon as possible or they'll all end up in serious trouble. He also reminds Jed that they still have to capture more girls coming from the city. The captors realize time is running out and panic begins spreading among them. Standing near her container, Katie secretly overhears the entire conversation. Soon afterward, Boris goes into her container and sexually assaults her. At the same time, Jason arrives at the restaurant to continue searching for any clue that might lead him to the missing girls. Jason moves one step closer while Katie fights to survive another day. Jason goes back to the place where Katie and Nancy first met the two guys and asks one of the employees if he's seen them. The man tells Jason about Boris's vehicle, giving him his first real lead. The next day, Katie tells Nancy that their captors are planning to kill them. A little later, Jed and Boris bring in the same drug-addicted man who had sexually assaulted Katie. Before leaving, they tell him to keep an eye on the two girls and make sure they don't escape. Katie realizes this may be the only chance they'll ever get. The moment the others leave, Katie deliberately lures the man closer by pretending to cooperate with him. As soon as he gets within reach, she bites deeply into his throat. Blood pours from the wound, and he dies right there. Katie and Nancy free themselves from their restraints and hide nearby until the corrupt police officer arrives. One desperate decision suddenly shifts the balance completely in their favor. They quietly steal the officer's vehicle and escape. From there, they drive to a store and buy a collection of unusual supplies, including hammers, a large number of nails, tennis balls, and several dangerous weapons. Afterward, they ask a security guard for Boris's address, and he tells them exactly where to find his house. For the first time, the hunters become the ones being hunted. Meanwhile, Boris is relaxing at home, listening to music when Katie and Nancy suddenly arrive. They throw a tennis ball covered with nails straight into his face, knocking him unconscious. When he wakes up, he finds himself tied to a table. Boris offers them a huge amount of money if they'll let him go, but Katie and Nancy want only one thing: revenge. No amount of money can erase everything they were forced to endure. At the same time, their uncle Jason arrives outside Boris's house. Inside, Katie and Nancy demand the address of the man who wore the pig mask. Boris gives them the information. After that, they kill him. Hearing Boris's screams, Jason rushes into the house, but by the time he gets there, Boris is already dead. Moments later, Jason hears a vehicle speeding away. When he runs outside, Katie and Nancy are already gone. Jason keeps arriving only moments after every brutal act is finished.
Jason hurries back to the police station and questions the same officer again about Nancy. He then calls Katie's phone, only to discover that the phone is actually with the officer. Before Jason can react, the officer stands behind him with a gun pointed at his back. Meanwhile, Katie and Nancy arrive at a church. The search is closing in, but danger still waits around every corner. At the church, they discover that the man behind the pig mask is actually the local priest. Nancy approaches him carrying a baseball bat, and he immediately recognizes her. Before he can react, Katie strikes him from behind with the bat, knocking him unconscious. The man who once terrified them now stands completely powerless. They tie him to the back of their vehicle and drag him into town. There, they buy matches and gasoline from a store, pour the gasoline over him, and burn him alive. At the same time, Jason is still being held captive by the corrupt police officer. Their revenge continues, while Jason remains trapped with no way out. A short time later, the officer kidnaps two more young women. As he begins attacking them, Katie and Nancy quietly sneak up behind him and knock him unconscious with a baseball bat. When he wakes up, he's tied to a chair and desperately begs for forgiveness. Katie loads a single bullet into a gun and terrifies him. They repeatedly pull the trigger, and each time he survives, he begins to smile. Then, Then, the very next second, Katie shoots and kills him. Afterward, Katie and Nancy free the two kidnapped women, tell them to untie Jason, and leave. Once Jason is released, the girls explain that two women rescued them. Jason immediately realizes they were Katie and Nancy. Meanwhile, Jed and Lucas's mother begins feeling strangely dizzy after having a drink. She collapses unconscious. When she wakes up, she finds herself tied to a chair in the basement. The final reckoning has only just begun. Jed has also been tied up directly in front of his mother. Katie and Nancy beat him with a baseball bat in front of her before killing him. His mother breaks down crying. They then take her to Lucas, place a baseball bat in her hands, and order her to kill her own son. They threaten to shoot her if she refuses. She can't do it, so Nancy shoots Lucas instead. Afterward, they wipe the gun clean and place it in Lucas's hand, making it appear as though they turned on each other. Every piece of evidence is carefully arranged before they walk away. Their mother begs for her life and offers them a large amount of money if they'll spare her. Katie and Nancy only laugh. Katie then kills her with a cutting machine. Several days later, Jason visits Katie and Nancy at home. The nightmare finally ends, but its scars will never disappear completely. In the final moments, Katie and Nancy once again head to the New York agricultural farm with their uncle Jason. This time, they finally arrive at the farm they were supposed to reach from the very beginning. At last, they reach their destination, forever changed by everything they survived. Not every survivor gets their life back, only another day to live with the memories. If stories like this stay with you, subscribe to KTS Mosan. Some nightmares end, but they never let go.